Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. If it's your first time, if you decide that anywhere along the way that you know, hey, this is pretty cool, I like these videos, well, by all means then hit the like button and subscribe and you'll get notifications anytime there is a new video, so you don't have to wonder, hey, is there a video out? Is there anything? Well, you'll get a notification, so you'll find out right then and there if a video is uploaded. So go ahead, hit the subscribe button if you'd like. Other than that, we are going to get started into what today's process will be. So this is on the 97 Neon engines. If you have gotten to the point where you have the cylinder head taken off and have the engine apart from the transmission and you've now transferred the engine back onto the modified stand, this video is probably for you because you'll probably be working on bottom end. Now, for bottom end, we're talking about the rotating assembly. So the rotating assembly, the crankshaft, the connecting rods, the pistons, the block itself. You're going to be disassembling that. So right here behind me, we have a block that has been completely torn down. It is empty at this point in time. I want to talk about what you should probably do before you get to this point. Now, as you may know, there's a whole bunch of measurements, a whole bunch of things that you should do. You should be reading the manual to make sure you don't miss anything. One thing you should do before you even get to this part is you're going to have crankshaft end play, which you're going to use a dial indicator for. One of the ones with the actual snake like we would use on the hub runout or things of that nature. Also, maybe side clearance for the connecting rods, in which you would use a feeler gauge. Those things you can take care of right off the bat. If there's not a spot in the packet, I'd make note just so you know before and after if you changed anything or not. For the better maybe, or maybe it's worse. At least you know and you have something to go off of. So a lot of these, I'd prefer you to have before and after specs, but not all of them. But let's talk about the disassembly. So what you're going to come in contact with is what we call anaerobic grease or sealer, which is a giant pain to remove. So here's what I recommend. Since it's an aluminum block, or not aluminum block, what am I saying? Aluminum head, cast iron block. Cast iron. Since a cast iron block, you can use a scraper or a razor blade when you're removing a lot of that sealant. That sealant is going to be holding the seal between the bed plate. So when you're actually removing, you'll find out that the caps are not really individual caps. It's actually a giant plate that comes apart away from the block so you can actually get to the crankshaft. Over here, all this stuff, this red dye that gets everywhere and it's hard to remove, it's okay. You can use brake clean. You can also use a razor blade. It is not going to hurt the block as long as you are not trying to nick the block. It should be okay. If it was aluminum, that'd be a different story. We would need a plastic scraper for that. But since this is cast iron, you can use a razor blade to try to get most of that off. Just don't make paperwork for me because I really don't want to do it. And maybe it's not Friday for you guys watching the video, but it's Friday for me. So don't get hurt on a Friday. That just kind of sucks for the rest of the weekend. So moving on from that, what you're going to do most likely next is once you have your measurements for end play, once you have the block to this point with, pretend there's a crankshaft and everything here. So crankshaft, boom, pistons, boom. What you're going to want to probably do next is remove the pistons out of the cylinder head. And the way you do that is you still can rotate the assembly. You still should be able to freely rotate the assembly, whether it's by screwdriver or having the bolt at the end of the crankshaft. Whatever means that you can safely rotate the crankshaft still, you can do this. The next part is you would want to remove the bolts from the connecting rod caps. So the bolts from the connecting rod caps, what I would do is whatever pistons are on bottom dead center, in this case if I was looking down from the bottom, it'd be the ones farthest up. I would start with those first. Since they're not recessed down the block, I don't have to get a whole bunch of different adapters or extensions to get to them. Work with the ones that are closest to you. Undo those, take the caps off very carefully. Do not mix them up. They are cast. The connecting rod is cast as one giant piece of steel when it first comes out of the foundry. Then they actually break it off to actually make the cap separate from the connecting rod. So do not mix them up. They cannot go with any other piston besides the one that they are with. And do not put them backwards either. Make sure they stay exactly as they were with that connecting rod once it's out of the block. One big thing you do not want to forget. The difference is a crankshaft that turns and one that doesn't, because your bearing might seize up on the journal, or the connecting rod will just seize up altogether, and then you have a whole entire assembly that is locked up. And it's very hard to figure out without tearing everything down if you accidentally made that mistake or not. So make sure you make markings on the caps and the connecting rods. What I suggest is either white out or a Sharpie saying, hey, this cap goes to connecting rod for cylinder 1, and then write the same thing on the cylinder 1 connecting rod, or something to keep track of where these parts are. Now, next, once you take the cap off, don't worry if they did their job correctly last year. The pistons are not just going to fall out the bottom. The rings actually keep them into a state where it's almost like a suction cup, so they actually stay where they're at. What you're going to want to do is either take something soft, not like a punch or a chisel or anything, but maybe the end of your mallet or maybe a screwdriver, and slowly tap down on the rest of the bottom connecting rod to actually slowly push the piston out. So while you're doing that, have your hand at the bottom, or maybe have one of your partners have their hand at the bottom and slowly catch the piston as you're pushing them out. Once you have done that, then you can go along and, if you haven't already, take the bed plate off, which is that piece that goes on the crankshaft, and then you can remove the crankshaft. Make note of any scoring. So scoring would be anything where there is any marks that you could catch maybe with a fingernail, or any striations that you may see, whether they are in the cylinder bores or on the journals themselves. Even the bearings. We found out yesterday one bearing was really messed up on a connecting rod journal. So those are the things you want to look out for, because those are the things, even though it's a little scratch or a little ding or a little pitting, that can keep a crankshaft from spinning. It can lock up an engine. One thing you definitely want to watch. So in a later video, right after this one, so this would be part 6? Part 6? Yeah, I think it's part 6. Wow, we made it pretty far. But the next video, I'm going to show you, once you have everything disassembled, what are the different special tools that you might use to measure the pistons for squareness, the rods for squareness, whether there's a twist on the rods, things like that. We're going to go over those special tools, including how to properly gap rings the old-fashioned way with the original tools that you guys would use. So that's going to be coming up in the next video. But what I wanted to really get at for this video was, once you get down to this stage, now it's time to take measurements. So once you get to here where you have your pistons nice and organized, you have everything out, do your measurements. So before you go any farther with the reconditioning process, take your measurements. So if you're actually getting measurements for the inside bore of the cylinders, whether they're out of round or tapered or whichever, we have the T gauges, which are transfer gauges. So you would use them, go down the cylinder bore in different spots, and every 90 degrees or so, switch them around so you don't have a cylinder that might be oblong or out of round. Make sure you take multiple readings. As you're doing that, you can use T gauges to transfer that to micrometers. I also have the special dial indicator in one of the cabinets. I will let you see how that works at least once, not to actually use your measurements, but to show you what most performance shops will use. I do not let students use that because it is very expensive and it cannot be dropped or mishandled. It's a very, very precise measuring tool. But I do have that to show you the other way that you would measure this. But for this time, we're going to use T gauges on most of this, including if you're trying to find what we call the oil clearances. Let's see if you have your main bearing cap still in. So right here, we see that they're taken out. But if you have your main bearing cap still in, what I would suggest you do is take your bed plate, put it back on, and take T gauge measurements with the crankshaft out. So now you'll be able to find your oil clearances this way. So what you do is you measure that circle opening for each bearing journal with the bearing caps in. So you're going to get that measurement. Then you're going to go over to your crankshaft and you're going to measure the journals. This measurement's going to be bigger than that. So all you have to do is subtract the difference, and that's going to be your oil clearance. But just remember, you have to divide that by 2. Divide that by 2 because of the size of the crankshaft when it's sitting in there, so it won't be just one giant number. Although when the crankshaft is sitting metal on metal, that might be the clearance until the wedge of oil takes up the space. So that's something else that you could be doing in the meantime. If you're waiting for the specialized tools, or if you're not quite ready to do cylinder head work yet, get all your measurements that are mentioned in the packet while the engine is disassembled. There's plenty to do. Also make notes of anything that is out of place. So another thing that we'll probably look at. Let's see if this guy can spin. This might be too locked down. Yeah, this one's still locked down pretty good. Let's say if I were to turn this engine over, also look down the cylinders. What you should find is a nice 45-degree crosshatch. So if you look inside the cylinder and you look at the walls, what you don't want to see is just lines going straight up and down. That's not what you want to see. You want to see really fine lines that intersect at like a 45-degree angle. That's when we were talking about during theory. That's what keeps the oil from just washing down the cylinder walls. The 45-degree crosshatch is what keeps the oil on the cylinder walls long enough for the rings to scrape them down to make a good sealing surface in the combustion chamber. So we want to take note, is there any scratch marks in there? Is there any, scoring going down the cylinder walls from maybe a ring being stuck or rings being improperly installed on the piston? Things like that you want to make note of. But make sure you make note of what the cross hatches look like in each cylinder as well. Those are some of the important things that I expect. Take notes, tons of notes, everywhere you can. I will give you a clean copy of the spec worksheet once you're done, so it's okay if you booger that up and you write a whole bunch of stuff all over it. It doesn't really matter, as long as you can read it you yourself. Other than that, like I said, if you like videos like this, make sure you hit the like button, make sure you subscribe so you know every time a video comes out. Other than that, I will see you guys in part 7.